I'm going to jump in and just introduce myself. My name is Kayla Gleason. I have my master's in strategic leadership from Roberts Wesleyan. I'm the chief of organizational strategy at Jericho Road Community Health Center. So I currently serve as the leader of HR, training, volunteer management, organizational strategy, and our executive assistant team, growth and strategic planning, our call center, and our director of advocacy. So it is a very full but very beautiful role. I have been in HR for about 10 years. HR is probably my home team. But I have been at Jericho Road, actually started as a volunteer over 13 years ago. So I've been a volunteer at Jericho Road. I've been an intern. I was hired as an entry-level finance employee and then became the manager and then the director and then the chief over HR. So I've had a really beautiful journey at Jericho Road, and it's definitely blessed me more than I have blessed it in my 10 years. I am married to Jason. We have been together for almost 15 years, and my daughters are Harper and Nora. They are the actual best. Harper just turned 13, Nora is 8, and then we have 2 rescue puppies, Sadie and Eggroll. All right, so we're gonna bust up a myth really quick about your strategic plan. We're just gonna kind of start there. Your mission, your strategic plan, it doesn't belong to you. It's what God is doing through you. So bathe it in prayer, be wise and discerning. You were invited into God's strategic plan, walked out through wherever you are currently serving. So that is an important thing to remember. If you take away nothing else from this session, I want you to remember that your strategic plan and your mission is all God, and it's the work that He's doing through your organizations. So here is the roadmap. When I talk about who are we, who is your organization? It's your mission, it's your vision, it's your values. It's kind of what charts the course for you. Where are we going? We use a lot of different tools. We use a SWOT analysis, we do departmental goals, and then we kind of identify our organizational strategic plan into goals, objectives, and tasks. And we do a 3-year strategic plan. So for us as a federally qualified health center, it is required for us to have at least a 3-year strategic plan, but I'm pretty confident in saying that even if it wasn't required of us, we'd probably do it anyway. It's just a good idea. It's a good thing to have in place. As you kind of make decisions as a leadership team or as board members, it can kind of chart the course for you of where you're headed. It helps with mission drift pieces. It helps you know who you are and where you're going. So a huge thing that we took on this year, so we are in the 2nd year of our current 3-year strategic plan. So we kind of tackled this last spring, and we recognized that we were ready to kind of change our mission statement. So our mission statement had been in effect for quite a while, at least since our previous strategic plan, but this was our mission statement in the previous strategic plan. So I'll give you a minute to mull that over. I underlined this one piece, because as we went through this process and we asked ourselves these questions at the bottom, are we asset framing versus deficit framing? We talked a lot about the language of underserved and marginalized, and if that was really how we wanted to say that. When we talked about our negotiables and our non-negotiables, that underlined statement was the only thing that we identified as our non-negotiable in our mission. Everything else we felt was subject to change. Everything else we felt like we could reframe, we could say it differently. We knew that that was the heart of who we were, but it wasn't necessarily a non-negotiable in terms of how we said it and the wording that we used. We talked a lot about the length of this statement. So there was a lot of rumbling because it's pretty long. And something we wanted to be able to do was be able to memorize our mission statement. If we are living this out, if we're applying it to each individual role, if we're talking about how this mission statement applies to different teams, could somebody memorize it? Could you say it out loud? I know after a few years at Jericho Road, I couldn't have memorized it. So we knew we wanted to shorten it a little bit and just make it more direct and something that we could kind of use in everyday conversation. So here's the process that we took to reframe that mission statement. So we sent out an all-staff survey that was really important to us. Our organization, for reference, we have about 400 employees in Buffalo. We have about 200 in our global clinics, but those are operated very individually, although they're under the Jericho Road umbrella. So we did survey all 400 of our existing staff members, and these were the questions that we asked. What excites you when you think about the future of Jericho Road? What worries you when you think about the future of Jericho? And review our mission and vision statements. Think about who we are. Is there anything that you would like to change about our mission, vision, or our core values? We didn't ask this question because we wanted to drift the mission. We asked this question because we wanted to kind of get a pulse point on if we were missing anything. Is there anything that people feel like they're walking out on a daily basis that feels like it didn't quite fit, or that they felt disjointed from what we say the mission is to what we're actually doing? Look at that little guy here. Ignore that that's there. Pretend that doesn't exist. When we got to an actual retreat, so we did do a retreat weekend. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the middle. Our CEO conducted a conversation and people gave feedback. We asked questions, we commented. The things that kind of stood out to us in that conversation were the word providing seemed really paternalistic to us. We didn't love that we were saying, we're providing this service to you, those of you in need. It just didn't feel like we wanted it to. We talked a lot about the fact that our direction, our vision, the support that we can offer, it comes from the folks that we serve. So I think that's one of my favorite things about Jericho, is that we do not show up in communities and say, we'd love to tell you what it appears that you need here. We like to show up and say, you tell us what you need, and we'll figure out if we can meet that need. So that coming from the folks that we serve, we wanted that to kind of demonstrate some interconnectedness. We wanted to shorten it. We talked a lot about equity, and we talked a lot about shortening our list of values. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. The executive and the senior leaders. So we have about 40 senior leaders in our organization, and our executive team is about 8 people. So the COO and myself, we proposed a new mission, vision, and values to the executive team based on the retreat, based on all the feedback that we received, and then we rumbled about it. We picked each word apart, we challenged each other, we had really good conversations. We brought it to our senior leadership team, and we rumbled some more. And that was really to make sure that we understood how our leaders are walking this out and what our leaders think is important. And so we really wanted to make sure that it felt like it fit and that we understood every single individual word that was comprising those statements. This is our new mission. So this is where we landed. We took out the Jericho Road and we wanted to say we, because that was that interconnectedness. That was our relationship with the communities that we were serving, was that we care. We didn't want to say underserved and marginalized anymore. We wanted to say our communities, any communities that we find ourselves in, any communities that we feel called to or that we're invited to. So we wanted that to be more all-encompassing. We also wanted to positively frame that we advocate for systemic health equity. We really wanted to talk about our advocacy in the health equity space and really figuring out how to address those systemic issues. But we didn't want to say we're dismantling the systemic issues. We wanted to say that we were advocating for the change in them. And then our only non-negotiable stayed. Our vision changed just a little. So our previous vision statement is up top. And again, it was that underserved and marginalized that we just didn't want to keep putting out there. We wanted to just use different language and change the conversation a little bit. We also removed communities in Buffalo. We've been talking about expanding beyond Buffalo. And across the world, that just continues to develop for us. So we didn't want to feel like that was too narrow. We didn't want to specify Buffalo and across the world. We wanted to say in general, this is our vision. And it's for individuals, families, and communities to become healthy and whole, wherever we find ourselves. Old values and new values. We had 1 million old values, which didn't give us, we talked a lot about this in like the HR space, was when we talk about our guiding lights being our values, all of those were hard to bring into conversations with employees. So it was hard to be able to remember what those were and recall them. We had a lot of questions about what those values look like in different roles. How would we know that somebody was demonstrating these values in their roles? And if each individual role is tied to mission, we really challenged ourselves to figure out if we could use our values in everyday conversations. So we pared it right down. I, in my home with a whiteboard, looked like a mad scientist trying to figure out how to not abandon any of them. So that was the really big part, is that these core values, these old values, they're all part of our DNA. They're all good values. They're all values that we wanted to honor, but we wanted to kind of categorize them in a way that made them able to be put into normal everyday conversations. So you'll see kind of my italicized words in the descriptions. The descriptions got a little bit longer, but we could kind of house every single one of our old values that we didn't want to abandon and kind of categorize them into our 3 new. And now I will tell you, in terms of our performance conversations, in terms of our tie to mission conversations, in terms of our all staff meetings, we talk a lot about community, equity, and integrity because there's only 3. And because we know what they mean and we've talked about these definitions and because they're organically part of all of our conversations. But now, for the most part, I would say our staff has memorized all 3. They know that these are the 3 that we're walking out every single day. We talk a lot about the footsteps that we're taking. And if we were taking sequentially footsteps, they would say community and equity and integrity, community, equity, and integrity. So that is our hope, is that when we're walking, our footsteps are always balancing one of these values. But where do we start? So in terms of our, yep.
I might have missed it, but did you have the board involved in that discussion?
We do. Yep. So that part will come up with the retreat. We had the board involved in all of that. Absolutely. So we wanted to have all levels. So we had that all staff survey. We had our mid-levels, our senior leaders, and our executive team, and our board. So where do we start? We talked a lot about our pre-retreat. You're going to pray at every step through here because, again, your strategic plan isn't yours. It's God's. So you want to invite him into literally every single step. So in the pre-retreat, we covered our meetings in prayer. The COO and I divided up our departments, and we met with each of our senior leaders, and every single department in our organization did a SWOT analysis and their own strategic plan. And we'll look at those department ones. We also sent that survey to all staff. All of that was prior to the retreat. The retreat was a weekend, and we had a Friday evening and a majority of the day on Saturday. That included our board, that included our senior leadership team, our entire executive team, and then some of the key levels of some key leaders from our mid-level team. So that retreat, we opened in prayer. We grappled with our mission, vision, and values. We went through that staff survey. Our CEO led a conversation about the mission, vision, and values, and that room of probably 65 people commented and suggested and rumbled with the information. We also worked on an organizational SWOT to bring the common themes together. We'll kind of see how that translated in here too. But we basically took those departmental SWOTs and we looked for trends. And we pulled those out to say, okay, these are things that are across the board in our organization that we could say are organizational strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then we moved into goals and objectives. We have 6 main goals in our strategic plan, and then you'll see kind of objectives fall into that. We take all of this in those 2 days of the retreat, and we go into kind of the post-retreat. The post-retreat is where we debrief, we then synthesize the information. Our incredible executive assistants write down literally everything in that room, everyone in that room says is in our notes. And we could kind of rumble with that a little bit and talk about the pre-work and each departmental conversation, the retreat, which was kind of all levels of the organization rumbling with this information, and then how that gets put into the actual documented strategic plan. And then we talked about distribution and communication. It was really important to us that everyone in the organization would have access to this plan and could see it as a living, breathing document. We do review it every single year. We go back, we sit with all those leaders, and we say, does something need to shift? Do we need to keep this goal? Is this still on track? Do we need to move it a year? Because we know that in our work, it's pretty malleable. A lot of things can come up. So we wanted the document to be living, and we wanted it to feel like it was really tangible, and it was very direct. So we distributed the finalized strategic plan to our executive team, our senior leadership team, mid-level leaders, and then an all staff as well. Diving deep into the pre-retreat departmental work. So we did a SWOT analysis. Every single department at Jericho Road did the SWOT analysis. So we talked about strengths, what are you doing well in your team? Weaknesses, what can you do better? Opportunities, where can we expand or enhance what we're doing? And threats, what might you need to mitigate? That was a big one for us. A lot can impact a health center. A lot can impact an FQHC. Then we boiled down, we knew that we wanted our strategic plan to have 3 to 5 categories per department. So that could be quality, it could be quantity. Each department kind of had their own 3 to 5 emerge. In HR, we talked about recruitment, we talked about retention. In credentialing, we talked about number of providers, number of nurses. So each department kind of took ownership of their own strategic plan and had 3 to 5 categories and then 3 to 5 goals per category. So for example, if we were talking about quality, we talked about increasing patient satisfaction by a finite percentage. We talked about quantity. Maybe it was increase your patient base by X percentage. And then we used SMART goals. And we really perseverated on this part of it so that the plan could be comprehensive and clear across the entire staff. And in our staff, there is definitely a pretty wide spectrum of literacy in terms of the English language, in terms of finances, in terms of what quality measures and things like that look like. So we wanted to make sure that it was very specific, that it was measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So we did use our SMART goals to kind of put every single one of those together. In preparing for the retreat, so now we've done this departmental work, and on file what we have is a SWOT analysis from every single department and a strategic plan from every single department. In preparation for our retreat, again this Friday night and Saturday morning, we sent out an email of prayer points. We did that at, again, multiple levels of the organization, and we said, here are the things we'd love for you to be praying over. We prayed for our leaders by name. We prayed for our staff members by name. We prayed for our board members by name. We really wanted to make sure that it was very covered in prayer as we went through this whole process. We sent out the agenda ahead of time. We sent out the menu ahead of time. We wanted to make sure that people felt like they were coming in knowing what to expect and being ready to only focus on what doing this work was going to look like. We assigned some pre-work, which was really familiarize yourselves with our current mission, vision, and values and be ready to talk about them. And we brought in the board. So our entire board was present. Yep.
I'm sorry, what was your time frame from the time you began your pre-retreat
Yeah.
until you were ready to send out just prepping them?
Yeah.
And then what was your time frame with the post-retreat until you were ready then to start informing the directors, leadership, the staff?
That's a great question. Yeah, it probably took about 5 months from start to finish. So our time to meet with all of those leaders and departments, we gave ourselves about 45 days, 6 weeks-ish. We kind of tackled department by department. We rumbled with the mission, vision, values, got the survey out. There were also a couple stages that were happening simultaneously. So we would meet with those directors and leaders while the staff survey went out. So some of them were kind of overlapping so that we could be moving in the same direction. And we could get it in kind of in the last 6 months of our existing strategic plan so that we were kind of ready to approve and enact as soon as that one was expiring. We also had each departmental SWOT and strategic plan printed and bound and on the tables for the retreat so that everyone that was involved in the retreat could kind of see those trends and see what each department was working towards. This was our agenda. So we kind of printed these out, we put them on the tables, and this was kind of the timeline that we followed. Sorry to get this granular. I know that when we were kind of making this up, we were like, how long is each step going to take? And we actually found that this was a really good amount of time for the number of people that we had and to the depth that we wanted to go into the information. So this was kind of what ours looked like. We did do some of this work in consultation with a reference from Steve from CCHF, who helped guide us through this process as well. So he came on site, he did a little bit of the pre-work with us. He came on site for the day and a half that we did this. And then we kind of just went back and forth with him a little bit. But he definitely helped guide us through this process, which was wonderful. So this is kind of what it looked like. We wanted to end well at a place where we could kind of close out on Friday night. We fed everyone dinner. We got to kind of enjoy the fellowship and the community of being together. And then we ended and we came back bright and early Saturday morning with some coffee and some breakfast, and we were able to jump back in. I will say we ended a little bit early. So we had lunch. We probably ended like 1:30. We were about a half an hour to an hour ahead, which we would have preferred rather than keeping everybody longer. So we were generous with our timeline. These are our 6 organizational goals that we had landed on. So throughout this process, what is in bold is the actual goal, the way that it's documented in our strategic plan. What kind of fits into that goal, or the things we wanted to be thinking about in relation to that goal, is what's in italicized underneath it. So what were we talking about when we talked about each goal? So we had a presentation for the weekend that had the goals up, it had the list of our small groups, it had the agenda, it had all of those pieces. But this is kind of where we landed. In the scope of our work, this is what fit for us. We checked to make sure that every department fit in here somewhere. We checked to make sure that all of these would be applicable to each department. So it was really a lot of, I'll say, like auditing and reconciling to make sure that everyone could feel that these goals were applicable to them, or could know how they fit into them, and or how they would walk this out on their team. Lots of SWOTs, so many SWOT analysis. So we did small group work, and we did a SWOT for each goal. So now, if we're tracking, we've done the SWOT for each department, we've put that together to combine into an organizational SWOT analysis. And we are now walking out small groups of doing a SWOT analysis on each of the goals. So we had 6 small groups. And we took each of those goals, I'm going to go back to this slide. We took each of these goals and divided into 6 small groups, and we said, how are we doing this thing well? How are we not doing this thing well? How could we expand or enhance in relation to this goal, and or what might we need to mitigate to accomplish this goal? Each small group presented, and the room reacted. It was important to us to have just ongoing conversation. So a goal would be, or a group would be tasked with doing some of this work, but then they'd take their giant Post-it and go to the front of the room, and the rest of the room would kind of interact, and we'd have an open conversation about it. That all still fit miraculously within that agenda. But we did have a lot of conversation. Another way that I've seen this done is I've done another strategic plan as well, not for Jericho Road, but is another thing that you could do and that I've seen be successful is you can kind of put those boards up. It depends on how many people you have. Is you can put those giant Post-its up, and people used colored dots to say, I agree with this, I disagree with this one doesn't feel like it applies, this is a good idea, this is not the best idea. So you could kind of do it that way. We liked the conversation. It was a good, robust conversation that we had. But if you had a ton of people, or if you felt like people would be more comfortable doing it that way, I've seen the colored dots used as well. Yes?
On the colored dots, did you do it like the color represented how they felt about it, or did the color represent a role of somebody?
The color represented how they felt about it. So you would kind of, I think it was the scale of like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. And I've seen that used as well, and that was successful. So this is an example of what that looked like. So you can see who was in that group was documented. You could see what that goal was, and you could see kind of the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats that kind of fed into that one. Our goal was to be as concise as possible, so we did a lot of the explaining when we were talking about it out loud, but everything was fairly finite as we documented it so that we would be able to easily access it and kind of talk through what that meant. Oodles of objectives, so many of them. So our small group work, we got back into our small groups, right? So now everyone's in the small group to do the SWOT analysis of the goals. And then they presented to the entire group. The group has kind of reacted. So then we took those goals back to each of those individual small groups, and we had people come up with the objectives and the tasks for how we would walk out that goal in consideration of that SWOT analysis. So everything kind of is building upon one another. The small groups presented on that as well. Here's an example of what that looked like. So this was goal number 1. An objective that was identified is right up there at the top, and then the tasks that fall in alignment with that. So here is the goal. What is one of our objectives? How will we know we've met that goal? How will we know that that's gone well? What do we want that to look like? And then how exactly are we going to do that? And again, with as many SMART goals as possible. We wanted it to be measurable. We wanted to have metrics where applicable. We wanted them to be very well defined and as concise as possible. So this is what this looked like for goal number 1. Again, who's in the group, what that goal is, all of the objectives listed out, and then all of the tasks to accomplish that goal. We really found that 3 to 5 for each thing was the sweet spot. So other than the number of goals, which we kind of tipped the scales into 6, we really wanted to stay at 3 to 5 objectives and 3 to 5 tasks per objective. Our concern in that was we didn't want it to get so large and so vast that it either was no longer able to be accomplished in 3 years, or that we had so many different objectives that we didn't know in what direction to head. So that was why we kind of narrowed the funnel to be 3 to 5. Finalizing it. So we took that mission, vision, values feedback, and we finalized. That was where our COO and I kind of rumbled with the information, brought back a proposal. We rumbled as an executive team. We rumbled as a senior leadership. Also, I realize I say rumble a lot. I mean that in the very best way. I mean, we challenge each other. We ask each other hard questions. It's all very healthy. But we rumble a lot because we think that that's the best way to make sure that we're on the same page to move forward. We compiled all of the information. We reviewed the strategic plan in its entirety as an executive team. It went back to the board for approval. And the board had been well aware of how they were at the retreat. They had participated in the survey. They knew each step that we were on. They helped identify those goals. I will also say, as a board kind of subset, the board also identified their goals. So those are a component as well. We talked a lot about board recruitment. We talked a lot about board composition. But when we did that small group work where we had 6, the board was its own group outside of those 6 goals so that the board could do the work on what the board wanted to accomplish as kind of the governing body of the rest of the organization. We presented it to senior leadership. We spent an entire monthly meeting on it, and we also presented it to all staff. It is also accessible on a platform that we're kind of all in across the organization so that people can pull it down, read through it whenever they need to. We've also asked all of our leaders to kind of pull their departmental items back down and figure out what that's going to look like years 1, 2, and 3. As we presented back to the board, this was one of the questions that our board chair asked that was incredibly helpful. It was a very good challenge to us as we finalized the strategic plan. If all of these plans were executed in the next 3 years, how would your community look different? Specifically measured against your mission statement. How would people see the unconditional love of Jesus, right, our only non-negotiable, if we accomplished everything in this plan? How would they see that we care for our communities? How would they see that we were advocating for systemic health equity? Part of this is just scripture tied back to your goals. I think this part's really important. So how do each of your goals fit into scripture? The very best strategic plan is one that we've already been given. You can find so much in scripture that is going to direct you and direct what God wants you to find important as you walk out this mission. So for us, these were our 6 goals, and there's scripture tied to each one of them. Who are we and where are we going? This is who we are. Our mission, vision, and values, our entire strategic plan, what we hope to accomplish in a 3-year period. This is who we are, and God has sent us wherever he needed us to be. So for us, that's multiple clinics in Buffalo. That's potentially growing into Rochester. That is multiple global clinics in Sierra Leone, the Congo, and Nepal. But when we talk about who we are and where we're going as an organization, it's essentially wherever God is telling us to be. And we're very intentional about that. We measure our mission against those decisions that we make. We measure our strategic plan against those decisions that we make. But that is the guiding light for all of it. Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Kayla,
Yeah.
Where did you incorporate the staff survey? I maybe missed which part of that, where you did that one in.
Yeah. So we rumbled with that a lot in the mission, vision, and values. So that's how we structured those pieces. It also fed into the goals. So what excited people, what people were worried about, and what stood out to them specifically about the mission and vision and values. That was information we rumbled with in the retreat.
So did you have that feedback as part of that session? It was one of the documents?
Yep. Yeah, we had the giant packets that we did, the departmental SWOTs, the departmental strategic plans, and then the survey results. They were all anonymous and de-identifiable, but we categorized them into each one of those questions, and then we kind of used those in formulating the goals and kind of feeding it back into all of that work. So you kind of saw it peppered throughout. A lot of the worries is what fed into our weaknesses and threats. It helped informed a lot of that part. Yes, go ahead.
So, when you broke into groups and discussed your goals and created your objectives and your action points, you said that you created metrics for all those. I'm curious, from that, did you create any kind of a dashboard? The metrics are going to show where you are in 3 years. The dashboard kind of gives you a snapshot as you go along monthly report.
Yeah. Those fit into specifically for the departments. So a lot of the departments are responsible for their metrics, and those are things that we review when we do that annual review of where they are in the strategic plan. So a lot of those metrics fed back in. So we wanted departments because we have kind of a social programs component and we have the healthcare component. We have behavioral health, we have pharmacy. It was such a vast scope that we kind of put those metrics that were pertinent to each department back into a dashboard for those departments. So they look different, but we can combine them annually to be able to tell where we are across the board.
But the departments are looking at the dashboard on what frequency, monthly? Or, okay, great.
Yep. Yeah. Our leaders are usually measuring those monthly. A lot of our data systems are set to run pretty regular reports that go out to those leaders. Yes, go right ahead.
The non-negotiable part of the mission statement
Mm-hmm.
reflected kind of particularity. The goals could look very generic, not in a negative sense, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't require specific faith.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're you know what I mean, they're not directly related to the let me see the best way to say this. They are related, but you could be in disagreement with the non-negotiable part of the mission statement, but be in agreement with the goals.
Yes.
How diverse is your staff?
Very.
Because you could, for instance, you could pass out to our staff prayer points.
Yes.
It's not going to mean the same thing.
Yes.
for everybody. We have a vocabulary within faith that's unique to faith.
Yes. Yeah. So we have staff members from about 40 different languages.
What about faiths?
If about that many. So we do have, we have a lot of Muslim staff members. We have a lot of Jewish staff members. We have very diverse from a faith perspective. And that was something that felt important to us as well, is that our mission statement would be very specific to the love of Jesus, but that also that there would be ways for you to walk out our mission in whatever faith you identify with, because our staff is so diverse. So that mission is the guiding light for our leadership specifically, but also you could feel very tied to that mission and those goals, even if you came from a different faith.
Do you require, at the board level, the executive team level, a statement of faith? Or is the board diverse and the executive team diverse as well?
The board and the executive team are not diverse. The board and the executive team are identify as Jesus followers. And that is very clear to us. At our senior leadership level and below, we have a lot of diversity of faith. But it has traditionally been a requirement for our executive team and for our board. There's been a lot of conversation about it, though, if I'm being totally honest. There's been a lot of conversation about it. But traditionally, that's been true. Yes?
How much of this do you actually, does your staff get the whole strategic plan?
They sure do. It's very transparent. Yep. And some of the ways that we rolled it out once it was finalized was that it was going back to each departmental meeting. So the entire department would know what they were responsible for. One of the ways, I speak from the HR perspective just because I've walked that out with that team, we figured out how each role fit into each one of the goals and objectives of our HR strategic plan. So we got as granular as saying, if this is your role, this is where you fit into that departmental strategic plan. But it's been part of departmental meetings, and then sometimes that becomes part of one-on-one goals as well. That we want it to be like a very common part of the conversation to refer to the strategic plan, to refer to the mission and the values and the goals. Yep, go right ahead.
Question, and you may have answered the first one. I know you said your board and the executive leadership get to know that they're Jesus followers. Is there any signed statement of faith?
There is not a signed statement of faith. No. We interview and we ask a faith-based question. We are not a religious organization. We are faith-based, so we have to be careful about how we ask that question, but we don't require like a signed statement of faith.
And what about the staff? Like when you hire staff, is there a faith-based question or a religious?
It depends on the role, not always. We will ask the question in leadership, but we don't require across all departments or job titles. Yes.
On your website?
Pardon?
How much point do you talk to us on your website when you see it?
I don't think our strategic plan is on our website. Yes, great.
I might have missed this when you first introduced the process. How would you briefly define the vision and the mission? And which comes first?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest that I might answer this question differently than even other members of my team. But I think our vision has been you'll notice that it's a little bit more narrow than the mission. Or I guess the mission is more narrow than the vision, but it's shorter. We wanted clarity surrounding the vision. I'd probably define chicken or the egg. That is a good question. I feel like our vision is what we're hoping to do, and our mission is how we're going to do it.
So the vision came first.
Yeah, I would say the vision is the larger umbrella, and the mission is more how we do that. Yes.
You may not be able to do this, but I'm curious, you said timelining it, estimated. Obviously, I know there's a bazillion contingencies in that.
Yes.
But from start to finish, it was about 5 months.
Yes.
Is there a way to briefly walk through, like, the segments? So for example,
Yeah.
we have this great idea to launch this
Yep.
to the staff survey, to the retreat, or even those 3 headers, right? Pre to retreat to post.
Yeah.
Just to give an idea, if you spent 40% of your time on the front end or on the back end.
Yeah. I think it was probably a lot more time on the front end. And then once we got to the retreat felt like the catalyst to just kind of run out the rest of it. So a lot of that was the departmental work and the survey going out and time to respond to that survey. A lot of that was front-loaded. So it was probably like 6-ish weeks to have the departmental conversations. The survey went out simultaneously. So we were collecting that staff survey information while we were having those departmental conversations. That period was, like 6 to 8 weeks. So probably even 2 months of that entire period. Planning for the retreat, gathering that information, binding the data to get ready for the retreat was probably a month. So we're month 3. And then the last 2 months was probably the board conversations, the executive team conversations, finalizing the mission, vision, and values with everything that we learned up through the retreat, formalizing those things, having the conversations about them, probably a month. Board voted on it that month, and then we spent a month walking it out. How does that apply to departments, distributing it, the communication plan? If I could sequence it, that was about the 5 months.
Thank you.
Yep.
That just helps.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yes.
What was your survey response rate? Did you get a sense of how?
It was shockingly high for Jericho Road. We usually see, lower participation in stuff like surveys. I want to say we sent it out a couple times. Not even going to lie, though, we also incentivized it. If we have, whatever departments have this rate or higher, we'll buy you a team lunch, we'll do fellowship, we'll kind of do that. So I think our response rate was somewhere in the high 60%-ish, almost 70. It's pretty good. I feel like our average participation in some of those things is usually pretty low, but the incentivizing helped. we were doing a lot of work for wraps and subs. So it was good, but we got a good response. Yes.
Could you speak more about the walking it out phase, where particularly on how you're taking the strategic plan and kind of coding it to the different roles so that it
Mm-hmm.
comes out not just in the leadership level, but all the way down to frontline staff?
Yeah. So a lot of once the departmental spots and strategic plans were formulated in that kind of 6-week period, those leaders could kind of start to figure out what those were going to look like on their teams. And that was pretty simultaneous to like the retreat process. That final month where we were really walking it out, a lot of the meetings that we have at least monthly. So our executive team, we have weekly. So we kind of walked that out week 1. We have senior leadership once a month. So that was kind of week 2. Mid-levels was week 3. All staff was week 4. So we kind of in sequential kind of tackled each one of our meetings so that we could roll that out appropriately for those that had a high level of ownership and design of the process down through every single position kind of by the end. So by the time we got from our leaders figuring out how they applied to their departments down through actually communicating it to their teams that very last week of essentially month 5, our leaders were ready at that point to be able to have individual one-on-one conversations about how that applied to those roles. So some of that was happening kind of in tandem with other pieces of the process. Yeah?
Is that now changing, like the way performance reviews are happening, right? Is that now like shifting? So now this is how your role connects to the mission, and then when
Yep.
reviews come up, how have you?
Yeah, and those values are incorporated into our performance system as well. So when we talk about community, equity, and integrity, we started to incorporate that into our performance conversations, our one-on-ones, kind of tie to mission, job descriptions, all of those pieces. The other piece that actually led to for us was we created something called the Jericho Road agreements. And that was agreements that we were making within staff and what we thought those 3 values actually looked like. So we kind of made this statement of agreement that all staff would be signing. That would say, we will assume the best in one another. We will start each new day fresh. We will be committed to diverse communities, to embracing diversity, to understanding that we don't know everything, but that we're interested and want to know more about one another. So those values became part of those performance conversations, job descriptions and those pieces specific to role. And then we actually recognized that we needed some agreements surrounding what it looked like to walk those out, which has mitigated the personnel, HR, conflict pieces where people just tend to bump into each other in this work that is complex. And it started to mitigate that for us because we could kind of refer to these agreements and use them in conversation. Yes?
With the specific tasks, I wonder how granular you want to defining those. So one of the ones you said improve CQMs. Did you leave that up to the clinical staff to say we're going to pick up specific?
Yep. So that was the small group of our CMO. So she was intrinsically part of that conversation, and she drove a lot of that conversation, as well as our provider team and our nurse team.
So they decided for this year we're going to focus on this measure, that measure.
Yep. So our CMO works very closely and actually directly oversees our director of quality. And so they have had a lot of those conversations about how that would apply to other specific teams. We know that that is a piece that is decided kind of in those conversations, but that it's going to affect how multiple teams function. And so it's rolled out in that way, but it's very much designed by our CMO and our quality team.
And that was defined upfront.
Yeah. Yep. And they're constantly analyzing the data to figure out where we should go next in that. So that's part of the year check-in that we do too. For years 1, 2, and 3, is they'll kind of set the pace specifically for what that means for, Q1 of each year or kind of in sequence. Sometimes it's quarterly, depending on what we're looking at. Sometimes it's annually. But that conversation is ongoing always. Yes?
You mentioned strategic planning every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, this is the current one. How was execution on the prior one? And maybe what were some of your takeaways and hits and misses?
Yeah. So we actually analyzed a little bit. We tend to do this in looking at it annually. We tend to figure out what needs to be carried over. So there were some existing goals that we have that are actually carryover from our original strategic plan. or from the last one, where we said, actually, these still apply, and we want to keep working on them. We're either going to expand how we're working on them, or we didn't nail it in this 3 years. We need to carry it over, and we need to keep working on it. But maybe we need to think differently about how we were doing it and why we didn't nail it in this 3 years. So there were some things specifically in our goals and even those objectives and tasks that carried over from the last strategic plan. And we just put out the existing strategic plan as we were getting ready for this one so that we could try to figure out what needed to carry over. We'll do the same thing with this one, is annually we're assessing those goals, and anything that's kind of left over from this one that still feels applicable, I assume it'll carry into the next one too. Any other questions? All right, you can reach out to me anytime. I was just gonna put this up really quick so you can see what the final version looks like. So I'm just gonna scroll through quickly because I think we're very close to time. It looks intense, it's like 23 pages, but I promise a lot of this was carryover. So we do an organizational background and overview. We do a little overview on the strategic planning process. The organizational identity is our mission, vision, and values. This is the org SWOT, so this is all of the trends in the departmental versions. These are those goals we talked about. And then now this is where we get into each individual department's year 1, 2, and 3. Now, what gets more granular as you go to each department is each department still retains their own SWOT, and this is a little bit more simplified than the departmental version because all of the goals for that year are together, but each department still has those categorized in 3 to 5 different ways. So in this, it's kind of listed, but each department has these categorized, which helps feed into who's responsible for those pieces on their team. And then I think this is all the way through for each team, and then I think this is where it ends. I don't think there's any ending information. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. Yeah, all the way through, and then our board plans kind of bring up the end. But it is 30 pages over 3 years. So it does look intense, but being in year 2 currently, I can tell you that, we assess every year and kind of course correct if we need to, but for the most part, in identifying those SMART goals and those metrics, we were intentional about how many different things each department and team could take on.
How often do you report to?
At least annually, but it usually happens in terms of like a quarterly, hey, here's kind of what we're working on, or what's kind of been completed at this point, or what we've needed to shift. If it can't be completed or we've hit major stumbling blocks, all of those reports are going to our monthly board meeting. We do have a board meeting monthly. We do a very intentional overview at least annually, just to kind of cap out years 1, 2, and 3. But the strategic planning coming up all the time, if it needs to come up in a monthly meeting, it will. And we can kind of reference back to it. So our board has this in its entirety as well.
When you created the survey, did you have any questions that you expected the passionate responses to going in, like these are going to be the hot buttons, and were there any that you didn't expect people to be as passionate about that they ended up being?
Yeah.
What were those questions?
Yeah. I think at this point with 400 staff members, we just kind of assume everything is going to get a passionate response, and we just kind of plan accordingly. We get real humble, we lower our defensiveness, and we just get ready to receive what 400 people have to say. So I think we anticipated pretty strong responses across the board. The other thing that we recognize is with a staff that's as diverse as ours is, there are going to be competing demands and perspectives. There are going to be competing needs or competing approaches to how to walk out some of this. So we kind of took that into account as well. But we kind of assume everything is passionate at this point. 400 people feels like trying to agree on a temperature in a room. So we take that feedback as honestly and transparently as possible. Any other questions? All right, my information is on here. I'm in the Whova app. If you have any other questions, if you're processing, if there's anything that you just want to brainstorm or run by me or want to know any follow-up on, totally available. So let me know. Thank you so much for coming.